In 2022, Colorado's mountain towns were drowning in applications. A single affordable housing complex in Summit County opened its waiting list and got buried under 1,000 hopefuls, all desperate for a shot at staying in the communities where they worked. Teachers, nurses, bartenders, everyone scrambling for units that promised salvation from impossible rents and seven-figure home prices. But by 2025, same apartments sit partially empty. The affordable housing that was supposed to save Colorado's workforce has become a trap, with income limits so strict that getting a raise means losing your home, and rents so high that subsidized units cost more than what people were paying on the open market. The collapse wasn't sudden. It was a slow unraveling of good intentions crushed by bad data, where the federal government's measure of who counts as middle class bears no resemblance to the reality of resort town economics. And now, as billions in taxpayer money fund housing that workers can't afford and don't qualify for, local officials are realizing they've built the wrong solution to the right problem. The warning signs appeared first in the waiting rooms and application portals, where desperation took physical form. By 2021, Mountain Town housing had reached a breaking point that made national headlines seem understated. Local governments responded with urgency that felt appropriate to the crisis. Voter-approved tax increases flooded housing authorities with millions in new funding. Short-term rental taxes in Steamboat alone generated a 9% revenue stream dedicated entirely to workforce housing. Towns donated land. Counties fast-tracked permits. Developers like Gorman and Company announced massive projects, 172 units here, 268 there, all promising to finally give workers a foothold. The construction cranes multiplied across resort valleys. In Eagle County, foundations were poured for over 100 units on school district land. Glenwood Springs saw an 88-unit conversion project. Breckenridge unveiled Vista Verde Phase 2 with 174 income-restricted apartments. Every ribbon cutting came with speeches about solving the crisis, about keeping communities intact, about ensuring that the people who made resort towns function could actually live in them. But the foundation was already cracked, built on a federal metric that made no sense in places where wealth and poverty existed side by side in ways the data couldn't capture. Area median income is supposed to represent the middle. The Department of Housing and Urban Development calculates it annually for every county, meant to show where the typical household falls economically. In theory, it's a neutral benchmark. Set affordable housing at 80% of area median income and you're serving working families. Go to 120% and you're helping the middle class. In Colorado's resort counties, the math breaks immediately. Routt County, home to Steamboat, saw its area median income jump nearly 50% between 2020 and 2025. Not because ski instructors and hotel workers suddenly got massive raises, because wealthy remote workers flooded in during the pandemic, bringing investment income and stock portfolios that pulled the median upward, while the actual workforce saw wages inch up maybe 11% over the same period. Summit County commissioners started calling the data unreliable. Small sample sizes in rural areas meant a handful of multi-million-dollar second homeowners could skew the entire calculation. The numbers included not just wages, but retirement distributions and capital gains, tilting everything toward people who didn't work in the service economy that defined resort towns. And because so much of the workforce earned tips and overtime, income fluctuated wildly month to month, making it nearly impossible to pin down who actually qualified under rigid federal guidelines. Housing authorities found themselves in an impossible position. They needed area median income data to unlock federal funding streams like low-income housing tax credits, which could cover 70% of a project's cost. But those same income limits meant building housing for brackets that barely existed in their communities. In Aspen, officials struggled to fill vacancies at a 40-unit complex restricted to people making 50% of area median income. That translated to $48,000 a year for a single person, just over $23 an hour. The executive director of Aspen-Pitkin Housing Authority pointed out that even fast food workers in nearby El Jebel made more than that. They'd built housing for an income level their economy had priced out of existence. And when they tried to build for higher brackets, the federal subsidies vanished, leaving towns to shoulder the full financial burden of projects that still couldn't pencil without charging rents that working residents called unaffordable. The human cost showed up in places like Minturn, where Spencer and Camille Messer have spent 7 years in a mobile home with their 2 young kids. He teaches English and coaches cross-country at the local high school. She's a part-time nurse. Together, they make just under the income cap that would qualify them for a Habitat for Humanity house, one of the few pathways to home ownership in a valley where condos start at $1.2 million. But their mobile home park sits on land the school district wants to redevelop for employee housing. They might lose their home to make way for affordable housing they don't qualify for. So they're caught in a bizarre holding pattern, terrified of getting raises that would push them over the income threshold, watching Camille's hours at Vail Health to make sure their household earnings don't creep too high, knowing that career advancement could cost them their only shot at staying. It's a strange kind of housing insecurity, where success becomes a liability and ambition has to be rationed. Across the valley in Breckenridge, Gabby Blasso and her fiancé Josh moved into Vista Verde Phase 2 expecting relief. Gabby bartends at a steakhouse, pulling in about $60,000 a year. Josh is in nursing school, working occasional barista shifts for maybe $10,000 annually. Their 700-square-foot 2-bedroom costs $2,400 a month. The complex initially offered them a unit at $3,000, calculating their income at 120% of area median, which assumed they were earning $117,000 combined. The assessment counted Josh's savings and part-time wages as if they were stable income, inflating their earnings by nearly double. They fought to get reassessed down to the 80% bracket, but even at the lower rent, Gabby's paying more than a third of her income just for housing, the federal threshold for being cost-burdened. She doesn't call it affordable. Neither do the residents who pay $3,500 a month for 3 bedrooms in the same complex workforce housing that costs more than what many were paying on the open market before they qualified for help. Vista Verde struggled to fill its higher-priced units when it opened in fall 2024. The developer eventually offered discounts and waived work requirements just to get tenants in the door. Locals who called about applying were told the rents exceeded what they could afford. The town's housing director admitted they'd built supply that still wasn't serving the people being squeezed hardest, and the funding model made it almost inevitable. Without massive public subsidies, affordable housing developers rely on construction mortgages that have to be paid back through rent. Vista Verde cost over $80 million to build. Breckenridge kicked in $8 million in loans and donated land, but that barely dented the total. The rest came from private financing that demanded rental income high enough to cover the debt. When you set rents based on area median income data inflated by pandemic migration and investment earnings, you end up with workforce housing priced for people who don't exist in the workforce. The town of Vail is trying a different approach with its South Face project, 268 apartments on North Frontage Road that will cost the town over $500 million across 40 years of tax-exempt bonds. Officials are building flexibility into the income requirements, treating median income as a floor rather than a ceiling, allowing people who make 130% to apply for units priced at 120%.